We are facing a winter that's going to drive people inside more and more, and we're really at risk of seeing caseloads go up and hospitals get overwhelmed and more loved ones dying. So we need to do everything we can right now to slow the spread of COVID-19, to stop this spike in its tracks. If you were planning to see friends this weekend, maybe don't. If there was a birthday party or a gathering for dinner you were thinking about doing, don't do it. We're in a moment right now, or even with all the sacrifices I know Canadians have been making over these past 10 months, we are now going to have to really tighten up once again. This is frustrating, because I know we've all heard stories of people who've thrown up their hands and are not doing their part anymore. People who have stopped wearing masks, or people who are going out more than they should. And it's tempting for all of us to say, okay, well, maybe I can loosen up a bit more too. But the reality is, we need to go in the opposite direction. If there are people out there not following the rules when we know we need to, well, then those of us who need to are going to have to do even more. Because it's the future of our country. It's the future of our children. It's the future of our loved ones and our seniors. It's our economy. It's our businesses. It's everything all together. We're going to need to have to do this for another few weeks, for another few months, and we can begin to see the other side of this. We can do this. We've done it before. We know what to do. We understand this virus much better than before. We need to reduce our contacts. We need to do it right now. Je suis pas ici parce que ça me tente de l'être.
I'm not here because I wish to be here, and I know that you don't really want to see me here either, here in front of my home, telling you once again that we need to make sacrifices, but that's exactly where we're at. We are seeing a sharp spike in numbers of cases here in Canada as well as around the world, and we know what we must do. We must follow public health guidelines and directives. We must have less contact among ourselves. We must make wise and careful decisions. We must not gather together with friends, not celebrate birthdays together in person, to remain in virtual contact and at home in as much as possible. We've reached a point where, once again, we will need to tighten up our activities, to put a clear stop to the spread of COVID-19. And if we do so in the weeks to come, perhaps it will be easier for us to manage over the coming months. But let me speak truthfully, the coming months will be difficult for all of us. We're heading into winter. We will be forced indoors. And our activities will be even more restricted. COVID-19 will be able to spread more easily indoors. Therefore, we will have to take great care. We've been at this for 10 months now. People are doing the right things. We have shown that we can overcome this virus. We can control its spread. But now we're at a point, well, we'll need to do this once again and do even more than we have been doing in the recent weeks. Frustrating, because we all hear stories of people who are not following the guidelines, who are putting themselves at risk and all of us at risk. And even though we would like, perhaps, to do as they do, we know that we can't. Those of us who do follow the directives will need to follow them even more honestly and strictly. This feels unfair to everyone, but we do know what we do need to do, and we know that this is the time to draw together, to come together, and do what we have already done, what we did in the spring.
To protect jobs, to support businesses, and to keep Canadians safe. We need to work together, all of us, as a team. Yesterday, I had a briefing with Dr. Tam, Dr. New, Minister Haidu, and the leaders of the opposition to discuss the current situation. All orders of government must come together to stop the spread of this virus. This was something I discussed last week with the premiers at our 21st virtual First Ministers meeting since the pandemic began. Across the country, we're seeing premiers and mayors making very tough choices to go into further shutdowns. And I know how hard that is, and I want them to know that they have my support, our support as a federal government. The best way to protect the economy is to get the virus under control. Doing things to protect people's health is the best way to minimize lasting damage to the economy. You know, in the beginning, we thought of this as a contradiction, that the things we need to do to keep us safe are things that are actually hurting the economy. That was how we framed that first wave of shutdowns. But we actually now know better from seeing what's happened around the world, from seeing how Canadians have made it through that first wave and through this second wave that's ongoing. Doing the things that protect our health are actually the best things to do to protect our economy. Going into lockdown and supporting businesses while we're in that lockdown is a better way of ensuring their success in a few months, in a few years, than trying to tough through a virus that is running around unchecked. We know that we need to be there for each other, and the federal government is going to continue to be there to help businesses that are impacted by these shutdowns. That's a promise I made from the beginning, and it's a promise we're keeping. This isn't the fault of any individual business, and we're going to do everything we can to get them to the other side of this. That's why it was so important last night that our government's bill providing unprecedented levels of supports to Canadian businesses became law. I want to thank all parliamentarians for working together to get this through. These support measures include a new rent subsidy for businesses which will go directly to tenants, not through landlords. Up to 65% of rent can be covered for small businesses affected by COVID-19. And if your business is facing a public health lockdown, then we're also providing an additional 25% rent subsidy through the new lockdown support. Combined with the rent assistance, hard-hit businesses could get a rent subsidy of up to 90%. Canadian businesses can begin applying for these new measures as of Monday, and they will be retroactive until the beginning of October. Lastly, this new law also means that the wage subsidy has been extended until June of next year, securing jobs and support for workers right across the country. This program has been a lifeline for millions of Canadians. So we're making sure people continue to get this support. Go to canada.ca/coronavirus to find out what supports are there to help you.
I wish to thank all parliamentarians for having contributed to the rapid adoption of the new support measures put forward by our government. They include a new emergency rent subsidy that will be given directly to tenants and not to landlords. This assistance will cover up to 65% of the rental costs of small businesses affected by COVID-19, and if your business is subjected to a public order lockdown, you could receive an extra assistance of 25% to cover your rent, thanks to the new lockdown support measures. Taken together, these two measures can cover up to 90% of the rental expenses of businesses that are hard hit. Those who need this assistance can put in a request as of Monday morning. Moreover, the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy is extended through June of 2020. For further information, go to this website, canada.ca/coronavirus.
Our government is here to support businesses. We'll also continue to send additional targeted support to areas that are seeing concerning situations with rising cases. Last week, I announced specific support for Indigenous communities in Manitoba. Today, we're providing over $120 million in immediate funding to regions that are affected by outbreaks in Saskatchewan and Alberta. This will be used to support public health measures, food security, and other surge capacity needs. Minister Miller and Dr. Wong will have more to say at their regular update later today, but the bottom line is that we will do everything we can to keep people safe right across the country. À l'heure actuelle, on compte 52,000
At this time, we have 52,000 active cases of COVID-19 in Canada and 1,800 people in hospital. Over 1,100 people have died from this illness. Earlier today, Dr. Tam offered projections of what we're facing if we don't control the current outbreak. If we don't take action now, we might have up to 20,000 new cases coming in a day before the end of December. And if we don't reduce our contacts, that could be even higher. We must be realistic. The only way to shift this trend is to reduce the contacts we have with other people. If you don't need to leave your home, then stay home. Reduce your contacts. Help us to break this second wave and to save lives.
Dr. Tam presented the updated COVID-19 modeling for Canada. Canada could have up to 20,000 new cases daily by the end of December if we don't limit or reduce our contacts now. And if we loosen and increase our contacts, we could see tens of thousands more. I know this isn't what people wanted to hear, but we have to be realistic about the situation. We're seeing huge spikes in places like Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Nunavut, with a record number of hospitalizations across the country. Overwhelmed hospitals are a problem for people who need COVID-19 care. But it's also an issue for people who need other care, whether it's cancer treatments or emergency surgery. And each new case of COVID-19, every extra week that goes on with more cases, puts added pressure on our frontline workers and our healthcare system workers. Think about it. Our doctors, nurses, personal support workers, orderlies, hospital staff, they've been on the front lines for almost 10 months now, putting in incredibly long hours, being creative in how they can save people and protect people while at the same time trying to keep themselves safe, while at the same time having the same worries that each of us have about our loved ones, about our kids and schools, about our parents and our grandparents. And yet they keep showing up every single day to be there for us, putting their health, their lives, and in many cases their families' lives on the line to keep us safe. And they're tired. They have been heroes. They have been going above and beyond anything they might have thought they were signing up for. We need to help them. We need to give them a break. We need to stop this spike in cases. We need to think about them as we think about our loved ones who need medical help, who are vulnerable to COVID-19. As we think about the damage this is doing to families and to communities across the country. We need to step up now, all of us. The numbers show that right now, more of the most vulnerable Canadians are getting COVID-19, including seniors. And outbreaks in long-term care homes in Indigenous communities are rapidly rising. The only way we can reverse the tide is if we immediately reduce the number of people each of us come into contact with. If you live in a region that is experiencing a surge in cases, stay home if you can and avoid all non-essential travel. To employers who can do so, please make arrangements for your employees to once again work from home. And if you don't need to, don't leave your home. And if you haven't already, Join the over 5.3 million Canadians who've already downloaded the COVID Alert app. 5.3 million Canadians. That's over a quarter of all the Canadians in jurisdictions that have used the app who own smartphones. We are on our way to making a difference with this app because every use alerts other people that they need to be careful. And it's an addition to contact tracing of nurses and public health professionals calling up to see who you might have come into contact with. This will catch people you didn't even know you were in contact with. It's an easy thing to do to download the app for free. It's an easy thing to do to take a moment once you receive a COVID-19 positive diagnosis to plug it in. Many provinces give you that code right away as soon as you get your positive case, so please plug it in immediately. Some other places require you to make a phone call, which will take a minute to get the code to plug it into the app. But doing our part with this tool will make a huge difference. And I said that's 25%, over 25% of all people in participating provinces that have the app and have smartphones. Of course, there's 2 provinces that haven't yet made the app available through their healthcare system. I want to directly touch on that right now for people in Alberta and BC. If you live in Alberta and BC, you can already still download the app for free yourself and put it on your phone. And there's 2 reasons to do that right now as we go through this second wave. First reason is I'm still hopeful that the local health systems will put together a system where they can give you that one-time code, which will allow diagnoses in those provinces to be plugged into the system to alert people. But secondly, from the minute you download that app, it starts to work in tracing your contacts with people who also have the app. So if you're in Alberta and you come into contact inadvertently with someone who then goes home to Saskatchewan and gets tested positive, you'll be alerted that you should maybe get yourself checked. It can work even if your health system isn't yet on board. It's free, it absolutely protects your privacy, and it's an extra tool we have at a time where we need to be using all the tools we have to keep ourselves safe. That's what we need to do. Il y a plus de 5 millions de personnes.
Over 5 million people have already downloaded the COVID Alert app, so I encourage everyone to do so. Once you have the app, use it. It may warn you that you have been in contact with someone who has tested positive. If so, follow up. Isolate yourself, get tested. And if you get a COVID-19 positive diagnosis, then plug the 8-digit code into the app to alert those you know and those whom you don't even know that they too should get checked. It's free. It respects your privacy. And now, over 25% of the admissible population, people thus who have smartphones, are actually using it. It's an extra tool. And these days, we need every tool in the toolbox to get through this pandemic, this crisis. I'm counting on you. I'm counting on all of you.
Help us beat this second wave, save lives, because that's what's at stake. Every person that we lose to this virus is someone who has family and friends who loved them, who had plans for tomorrow and things they still wanted to do. I think about the woman in Toronto who survived the Holocaust and recently passed away from COVID-19. Forced to flee her home during the war, she and her family ended up at a labor camp in Siberia. She made it through and started a new life in Canada. She got married and had kids who loved her dearly. So to her loved ones, my deepest condolences for your loss. And to the thousands of other families who've lost someone because of COVID-19, my thoughts are with you. Every loss is a tragedy, and each story reminds us of what is at stake in this fight against the pandemic. Our parents and grandparents, our friends and neighbors, people who give so much joy to those around him, people who are loved. Je sais que c'est pas facile.
I know this isn't easy, but we have to be able to count on each other. We've been at this for 10 months now, and our first-line workers in the healthcare services are doing extraordinary work to support all of us, to help us. Our doctors, our nurses, everyone working in our hospitals, in our health system, they are there for us. They are putting in long hours. They are dealing with incredible challenges, unexpected challenges that they had no idea they would be facing, and they're doing so as they manage the same level of stress that we're all managing. Will I get sick? Will I bring the illness back to my home, my children? How will my children get through this? How will I get through this? The same stress that we're all living with. They have that on top of their responsibilities to help and save each and every one of us. That is what they've dedicated their professional lives to. They've chosen this path, but no one chose this pandemic. And we must do all we can to help them now. We must step up now to support them by stopping this spike in cases. And as a government, we will remain here for you, for all of you, providing direct federal aid for workers, families, and we will not let up, because we will get through this crisis together. If you have to stay home, we'll be there for you. If you have to close your business temporarily, we will be there for you. We continue to listen to the experts, to the doctors, and we are taking all necessary measures when it comes to personal protective equipment, to vaccines, everything to ensure that Canadians remain safe.
Working from home as much as possible, and I'll be addressing you again from these steps next week. Now is the time for each of us to once again rise to the occasion and do our part. We know what to do. We know how hard it is, but we know it works because we did it this spring. Together, let's bend the curve and keep each other safe. This weekend, I'll be virtually joining the G20 as part of our government's work to respond to this virus at home and abroad. And on that note, today I can also confirm that the Canada-US border restrictions have been extended until at least December 21st. We will continue to work with our American counterparts to keep people safe on both sides of the border.
I can confirm that the Canada-US border restrictions have been extended now through the 21st of December. We continue working with our colleagues on the south of the border to ensure that all remain safe in both countries. We're also continuing to work with our partners, collaborate with them around the world, not only to protect Canadians, but to rebuild a strong economy that works for all. Today, I spoke at the meeting of the directors of the Asian Commercial Group, and I spoke of the work we're doing to fight climate change and build a resilient new economy. This weekend, I will be speaking with other leaders of the G20 to speak of our common work to overcome COVID-19, protect our economies and our jobs.
This morning. But here's the bottom line. We have a long winter ahead. As the weather drives us indoors, we really are in danger of seeing more transmission and far too many more deaths. It'll be tough, but we know what we have to do. Wear a mask, keep your distance, download the app and use it, avoid gatherings of all sizes, and know that together, being there for each other, we will get through this. Merci.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions aujourd'hui.
We'll begin the question period with one question and one follow-up. First.
Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. My first question is for Catherine Levesque of Canada Press, Canadian Press. Thank you, Mr. Trudeau. The Radio-Canada is saying this morning that some members of your caucus would be unhappy by Quebec's announcement about the possibility of families gathering over Christmas. Are you unhappy with that announcement? No, not at all. I think that Premier Legault is doing everything he can to recognize the reality in which people are now living, to encourage them to do everything required to reduce their contacts this week and in the weeks to come in order to perhaps have a little break over Christmas that won't cause another major outbreak of COVID-19. We are still far from Christmas. There are a number of weeks between now and Christmas during which we are in a position to take the measures required to flatten the curve. I trust Quebecois people, and I trust all Canadians, that we will be able to do what we must do to protect our loved ones, our elders, for first-line workers in the healthcare system. It will take us all working together in the weeks to come, but I think that we can do this.
I think we need to recognize that there are many weeks still until Christmas, and it's right to give people hope that there might be ways we can gather at Christmas, but so much depends upon what we are doing right now, immediately, to reduce our contacts, to get through these next weeks and see the cases that are right now spiking almost out of control get back under control. We all want to try and have as normal a Christmas as possible, even though a normal Christmas is, quite frankly, right out of the question. But what kinds of limits we have in place and what kinds of permissions public health is going to encourage us to have depends a lot on what we do right now. So in the coming weeks, let's tighten up. Let's be careful. We've done this before. We can do it again. And the premiers and I and mayors and public health officials are all doing our part to support you, to give you the information. We need Canadians to keep doing what they're doing and tighten up.
Ensuite, question, Madame Lévesque.
Follow-up question, Ms. Lévesque. Yes, that said, since this morning, since a number of weeks and months, you've been asking us to reduce our contacts. Do you think it's a good idea that Quebecers should be allowed to get together 10 at a time over 4 days at Christmas? As I've said, look, many weeks between now and Christmas. And between now and Christmas, we have every reason to hope that people will do the right thing, that we will see a reduction in numbers of cases that will allow for us to behave as we hope we may be able to without more outbreaks. We know that people are tired. I know that people are just fed up. Geez, this is a real drag, this COVID-19. But we also know that if we remain strong over the coming weeks, and if we continue to remain firm in our undertaking to overcome this disease in the months to come, well, the vaccines are around the corner. It will be a tough winter, but we'll get through it together, and we will rebuild a better world for all of us.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Ryan Tumulty, National Post. Line open.
Sir, I'm wondering from your perspective, what do you think has gone wrong here? Were provinces too quick to ease restrictions, too slow in putting them back in place? Do you think your government bears some of the blame, or is this about individual Canadians and their own choices?
I think, quite frankly, we're seeing a spike right around the world in this second wave. We are seeing places that otherwise had things reasonably under control suddenly see spikes. I think there's probably lots of things contributing to it. There's probably more things all of us could have done differently or should have done, and of course we're going to learn from all those things. But right now I'm focused on what I know we can do. I'm seeing provinces, mayors, public health authorities bringing in new rules and tighter restrictions. I'm seeing Canadians willing to once again step up and do their part. As a federal government, we made a promise from the beginning that we would have people's backs throughout this, whatever it takes for as long as it takes. And that's what we're doing. And with these extra supports to businesses, with continued supports to Canadians, we're demonstrating that we will continue to be there, and I know we're going to get through this.
Following up, Brian?
Yeah, sir, I know you've said previously that many of the decisions around restrictions are in the hands of local governments, provincial governments. But one area that you could have an impact on is interprovincial travel. I know Premier Horgan has asked you to consider putting in restrictions on travel. I'm wondering if that came up when you talked with him on Thursday and if you're prepared to make any moves in that direction.
What I'm doing right now is telling people not to go out if you don't have to, not to travel if you don't have to, that for the coming weeks, we need to flatten this curve. I think that's the message we're hearing from premiers across the country. And I think Canadians are going to listen as well. I think the idea of bringing in the Federal Emergencies Act to shut down the borders and guard those interprovincial borders is not an idea I am even contemplating right now. I know that there are certain regions who have made decisions to protect and to close their own borders. The Atlantic bubble certainly didn't happen because the federal government mandated it. The provinces in the Atlantic stepped up and limited travel in their bubble, and it has worked very, very well, but they didn't need permission or direction from the federal government to do it. They just did what worked for them. Our northern territories have regularly brought in restrictions to protect themselves as well. Provinces have lots of tools at their disposal, and I'm not looking to bring in a federal hammer to try and do things when we've seen provinces be very effective at doing them themselves. But I will add my voice to all those voices across the country, from doctors to premiers to mayors who are saying, let's do what we need to do right now and flatten this curve to get this explosion of cases in the second wave back under control.
I certainly understand that some people do want a lesser movement among citizens, and indeed that's what we're here to encourage. I'm here to tell people, don't leave your homes unless you need to, don't travel unless you need to. It's risky, and we all need to do our part to reduce this COVID-19 outbreak. We don't need to have a federal government bringing in the Federal Emergencies Act to prevent people from moving around. If provinces decide to bring in extra rules to that effect, they can do so. And this is something we saw in the Atlantic provinces. They didn't need the permission of the federal government. They weren't directed by the federal government to create a bubble, and they did it themselves. And it worked very well for them. Same for the territories to the north that have brought in restrictions that have protected them rather well up until recently and continue to enact appropriate measures for themselves. Premiers do have the tools to do more, but I do know that they are saying, as I am saying to you, that now is the time to reduce our travels.
Operator, last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau. Je vous amène sur...
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I would like to address another topic. There is a sort of cabal on social networks about your statements regarding the Great Reset of the economy. This term is used by people who imagine there's some sort of a world plot taking the COVID as a chance to start this new world economy. What do you think? My responsibility is to protect Canadians, to keep track of what's going on now with the actual pandemic and help as many people as possible get through it, try to create a more resilient and stronger economy. We have seen very clearly that the most vulnerable in this pandemic have been hardest hit, people who are marginalized, who are racialized, women. Yes, we need to adjust our programming and our policies to be in a better position to help everyone. I think that's what Canadians expect from us, and that's what we have been doing over the last 5 years as a government, creating more opportunity, more equality, less barriers and obstacles for all in society. We also know that we need to do more throughout this crisis, this pandemic, and after it to fight climate change. We do indeed need to improve the way we operate as a society, as an economy, as a country. We need to reduce our carbon emissions. We need to look for new alternatives. Yes, a crisis like this is a good time to think carefully about how we can build a better world, a world even better than the one we have inherited from our parents. That's what I've always done, and that's what I will continue doing.
Is that we have gaps in our social safety net, in our society. The most vulnerable who've consistently slipped through those cracks have been even harder hit by this pandemic, and we do need to make changes to strengthen our social safety net, to support workers and families even better, to make sure that as the world changes through this pandemic and beyond, we're there to help people succeed. And looking at how we can improve things, how we can bring in better supports, how we can create better prosperity and shared economic growth for everyone. These are the things that Canadians expect us to do, not just during a pandemic, but have watched us work on for 5 years. Over the first 4 years of our government, we lifted 1 million people out of poverty. We created 1 million new jobs in Canada, which was a record. We did that by leaning in on supporting people who are more vulnerable. And even as we deal with this crisis of a pandemic, we have to continue to deal with the crisis of climate change and the transformations we need to bring to our economy to better be positioned for the future opportunities and the future challenges. And that's working with our energy sector to lower our carbon emissions. It means working with our transformation sector and bringing in investments like the Oakville plant that's going to be zero emission vehicles. We're going to continue to do the kinds of things that Canadians expect us to do, which is work every day to make sure we're leaving a better world to our kids than the one we inherited from our parents.
En suivi, Hélène?
A follow-up question, Hélène. Yes, but what do you have to say to those, including MPs in the House of Commons, who see in your use of the term Great Reset evidence of some sort of grand plot? What do you have to say to this sort of conspiracy theory out on social media now? I think that we are living through a very anxiety-provoking period for many people who are anxious about this pandemic and its impact on their lives. People around the world are looking for reasons and also looking for solutions that sometimes turn out to be their conspiracy theories. But if there are any Conservative MPs who want to focus on conspiracy and plots and so on, well, they're welcome to do so, but we will remain focused on Canadians.
We're in a time of anxiety where people are looking for reasons for things that are happening to them, that the difficult moments we're in. It's nice to be able to try and find someone to blame, something to point to, something to get mad at. I think we're seeing a lot of people fall prey to disinformation. And if Conservative MPs and others want to start talking about conspiracy theories, well, that's their choice. I'm going to stay focused on helping Canadians get through this, on learning lessons from this pandemic, and making sure that the world we leave to our kids is even better than the world we inherited from our parents.
Hello, Prime Minister. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. In your speech, you said, quote, going into lockdown and supporting businesses while we're in that lockdown is a better way of ensuring their success in a few months, in a few years, than trying to tough through a virus that is running around unchecked. Are you now recommending a nationwide lockdown like we had in the spring?
No, I'm not. I am today using my voice and my position as Prime Minister to talk to all Canadians, to tell them that we're in a serious situation where they need to listen to their premiers, they need to listen to their public health experts on what they can do in their jurisdictions to do more. And while I say that, I also am reminding people of the federal government's promise to people that we would have your backs. And we've done that from the beginning with the CERB and now with EI. We've done that with wage supports for businesses, with small business loans, with measures like the rent subsidy that have helped and will continue to help businesses hang on and get through this situation that isn't their fault, but is hitting them hard. Our ability to hang on together and get through this relies on all of us working together, and that's exactly what I'm calling for.
So why did you reference specifically going into lockdown then as a way to help sort of support businesses?
Well, we put forward a measure that is the commercial rent support and subsidy that goes directly to tenants, not through landlords this time. And there's an additional 25% top-up that's called the lockdown top-up, that if you are under a local public health order that says you need to shut down for public health rules, we're going to give you an extra 25% support towards your rent. Because this is a reality that many provinces are bringing in restrictions, bringing in lockdowns, and wherever they are across the country, as a federal government, we will be there to give you that extra support, but also to reassure the people making those decisions about restrictions and lockdowns that if they make that decision that this community or this sector needs to shut down, the federal government will be there, as we have since the beginning, to support those communities, those individuals, those small businesses. Okay. Je pense que les gens doivent savoir.
I think that people are aware that we are here as a federal government to assist provinces in the decisions that they make, decisions that various administrations, jurisdictions are taking, either bringing in lockdowns or other shutdowns or reducing activities. This is up to them. These are their decisions, best taken at a local level. We can't have one approach applied across the country. There are so many differences across this country. That is why my role as a Prime Minister is to say and to remind people that we are here to help you and we will remain here to help you, including with extra support if you are in a place, in a sector, in a region that must shut down due to public health requirements. We know that making difficult decisions like this, essential though they may be, to reduce contacts is going to be the only way to get through this pandemic. Hello, Julienne Lapointe, Radio-Canada. You said in your earlier statement that you find it very frustrating to see so many healthcare workers having made so many sacrifices already and watching the figures rising and struggling with their own anxieties. I understand as well that you want Canadians to have some hope for the Christmas holidays, but if we allow for gatherings over Christmas, as is being proposed for Quebec now, don't you think that that will put extra pressure on healthcare workers who have already done so much? And what will you be doing over the holidays, sir? Since the very outset, I have been underscoring that my job is not to judge or to criticize the provinces. I'm here to work with them. I will be here, and we will be here as a federal government to provide direct assistance to citizens across the country, to support businesses across the country. That is what we can do. We will also remain here to support the provinces and help them make their decisions. We sent $25 billion worth of support to the provinces for contact tracing, for testing, for PPE, to assist the most vulnerable, and to ensure a safer return to school for our children. And we'll remain with them to work with the provinces. And we will continue, I know, to make appropriate decisions together. Over the weeks to come, we will see what we can allow for by Christmas across this country. That's why it's of the highest importance to tighten up what we're doing over the next few weeks. As for myself, well, this Christmas is going to involve a lot of time on the phone, on FaceTime, on Zoom with family members. I will be here at Lac Mousseau with the immediate members of my family, and nothing more than that. We're going to be in a very small bubble. We're going to take a moment to relax and celebrate the end of this year. Wow, this really tough year. Thank you.
Do you think that part of the problem here is mixed messaging, and that you're saying don't go out unless you have to, but some gyms are open, some stores are open, so there's a mixed message there? Or do you think that some people have just tuned out and just gotten tired of this?
I think a lot of people are tired of this. I think a lot of people are just wanting this to be done with, wanting to be through it. And I think the arrival of imminent vaccines on the horizon is both motivating people to say, okay, we're almost there, and others to say, okay, that's it, I'm done, I'm just going to wait. We need to hang in there. We need to know that the end is in sight, but we're not there yet. We still got to get over this hump of a winter that's going to drive us inside, endanger us to more spikes and more transmission, and really hang in there. And I know it was somewhat simpler in the spring when I could stand in this place and say, everybody across the country, stay home, don't go out. And it worked to bend that curve. But millions of Canadians suffered. And it was a blunt object of a tool, a national shutdown, that we now know actually we're seeing different jurisdictions in different provinces use targeted shutdowns and targeted reductions in a much better way. The idea for parents of having to deal with kids at home once again if schools shut down is something that obviously everyone's trying to avoid. But in order to avoid that, we need to make careful choices appropriate for every situation, every jurisdiction about how to limit things. And that means that your friend who you talk to who lives in a different city may have very different choices that they can engage in that you can't. And that seems unfair and it seems frustrating, and it is. It's unfair and it's frustrating. Yep, there's no question about it. But we're not in a fair situation. And all we can do is try and be there for each other as best we can. As a federal government, we're trying to make it as fair as possible for people by being there for the people who need more help. We're giving more help to businesses who are forced to shut down, more help for businesses that are really suffering, while others are being able to make it through. But everyone is sick and tired of this. And we need to know that the end is in sight, that spring will come after this winter. But in order to get through this winter without overwhelming our health systems, without losing too many more of our loved ones, we need to do one last big effort these coming months, and it starts with the coming weeks of really tightening up, which is why I'm back here in front of my house telling you it's time. It's time to tighten up. Je pense que je comprends que les gens sont fatigués.
Look, I really understand that everyone is tired. The situation is frustrating. It's unfair. It's unfair. You talk to friends in another place who have less rules imposed on them than us. We see people who aren't even following the rules that we have, who are carrying on their lives as if nothing were happening while we are being careful to reduce our contacts. There's so many unfair things right now. That's why the federal government remains here to help the most vulnerable, to help those who are most affected by the situation. But we are all making sacrifices. We're all suffering, and we must all step up and do our part. We are facing a universe right now, a situation that will be difficult. However, spring is around the corner. The end is in sight. Vaccines are coming. We have to hang in there over the coming weeks, the coming months. We need to do our part. We will get through this, but we must work together.
Good afternoon.
afternoon. Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. You have an urgency and a certain tone to your messaging today that doesn't seem to be being picked up by opposition parties who keep attacking the government's response. And at the same time, you continue to attack them, including just now accusing the Conservatives of peddling in conspiracy theories. Do you think that there's a risk to that approach in undermining the entire message and having people tune you out?
I think we've seen Canadians work together across political parties, across jurisdictions, as we've worked hand in hand with premiers of all different provinces in moving forward to support Canadians, and we will continue to. I think it's really important that our democracy continues to function well, that Parliament continues to sit, that opposition parties continue to criticize the government every step of the way. That's how our system works, and that's how it should work, because the government needs to be on its toes every time. It needs to think about the fact that it's going to be criticized for everything it does, and therefore we better do it as best we possibly can. That's the way our system works, and it's just fine. And for example, it showed that we can come together as we did to pass this legislation that just got royal assent that is going to send more help to businesses. We all come together as we need to. But it's also a time where, as a government, even as we are engaging with opposition parties, our focus is not on politics. Our focus is on Canadians. Our focus is on being there to support people. And if the opposition parties want to dive down rabbit holes, well, they get to do that. But where they want to work with us to deliver for Canadians, to say, well, can you do this more for Canadians? Maybe you can come and help this group this way. We're working with them. We're happy to work with them. We're happy to do more. We're happy to be pressed by them to do more. Because that's how this system is supposed to work. So yes, it can be frustrating to Canadians to see politicians, taking jabs at each other every now and then, but they also need to know that we are working together when it matters. Then they can make their judgments around whether someone's going too far with an elbow here or there, or a critique here and there, or whether or not we're actually doing the things that matter. And we're a democracy, so people ultimately get to decide how they move forward.
David Aiken, Global News. Prime Minister, I got the app on my phone. I know you get it on your phone. The federal government could do a whole lot to compel people to have it on their phone. For example, I wonder if you've considered any of these. All federal government employees, if you got a government smartphone, you're going to have the app on. All federally regulated industries, airlines, banks, if they own a smartphone and give it to employees, it's got to be on here. The CRTC tells us what can and cannot be carried on TVs. What about telling telecom carriers? Every new phone you sell out of the box has the alert pre-installed and the default is active. Have you considered some of those measures?
We have, and they are measures we are continuing to consider. We've seen a number of companies step up and promote utilization of the apps. Delivery companies saying all of our drivers will have the app, so you should have it too. There's lots of messaging we have. One of the core elements, though, is we want people to feel like they have ownership and agency over their decisions. I mean, there's so little that people can do in a pandemic, or seemingly it's this global thing that is so much bigger than us, that having things that you can actually choose to do and make the right decision to do and help each other out is very powerful. We don't want to order people to have it. We know Canadians want to do the right thing, which is why it is really important for me that it be voluntary. It protects the privacy to a greater degree than some health experts would like. They'd love to know who you contacted so they could communicate with them. They'd love to know where you were in order to see better what kind of case spread is happening. But we made the decision that protecting people's privacy and getting more people to use it was the right decision. So it absolutely protects your privacy. It's totally voluntary. And it does rely a lot on people wanting to do the right thing. But this is Canada. We've seen it time and time again as neighbors step up to help neighbors, as people choose to do the right thing, as people choose to help each other out. And keeping this app voluntary and entrusting Canadians with the responsibility of doing their part to help people is also a very important measure, even as I continue to say every time I get a chance, download the app, use the app, Plug in your code if you get a positive test. Get yourself checked if you get a notification. These are the things that we can do to help prevent this terrible pandemic.
Thank you, Prime Minister. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.
This brings the press conference to an end.
Merci tout le monde.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, that is the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, here on this Friday, returning to his home there and returning to press conferences much like the ones that we saw through the spring, which happened outside of the Prime Minister's house while we were dealing with the first wave of the pandemic. The Prime Minister using the symbolism of his home, which he says he plans to continue next week, to try and implore Canadians to follow public health directions and to limit their contacts with others as we deal with huge spikes. The Prime Minister called them massive spikes across much of the country. The Prime Minister also saying that, starting off his press conference saying, "Here we are again. I don't want to be here." Let me bring in my colleagues David Cochrane and Catherine Cullen for their take. It was, quite a press conference because you could feel, I think, the frustration in the Prime Minister's voice, at times becoming even emotional, particularly when he was talking about frontline healthcare workers. And I think using essentially, other than the Emergencies Act, which he made very clear he doesn't want to use, using the only tool that he has here, Catherine, and that is to try to compel people to listen to him and to follow what he is saying.
I had a thought while he was talking, Rosemary, that I felt was very David Cochrane-esque, which is, in the U.S., they have a commander-in-chief. I think he was trying to be the convincer-in-chief
yes,
today.
That is very David Cochrane-esque. Yes.
Why, thank you. I'm going to assume that's a compliment.
It is.
I really thought he sort of, to mix my metaphors too, threw all the emotional spaghetti at the wall there, hoping things would stick, right? I mean, what emotion did he not appeal to there? Your love for your family, your sense of community, concern and fear about what will happen. As you said, he got emotional himself, and he really just did, I think, a mix of both a positive message and a message of concern, although fundamentally it is in many ways the same message that he has been saying for so long, that public health officials have been saying for so long, right? Wear a mask, wash your hands, don't gather, stay at home. He is trying to be crystal clear about that. He tried to, I think, employ ultimately a fairly positive tone. I noted when he was talking about, let's say, the premiers or talking about his work with other jurisdictions, the opposition parties, there was this sense of we're all in this together. He said, my role isn't to judge the premiers and the choices that they make. I think there are maybe a couple of times over the past 10 months where we might say that he flirted with that line at best, but really an attempt to just employ every tactic he could, reassurance as well, like you name it, to try to get people to step up right now.
Yeah, and it did admit, as we had talked about before, and as we all know too well, that people are getting tired, that people are tired of it, that they see the vaccine, they know an end is in sight, and his job is to try and convince people that it's not over yet, and we have to somehow get through this difficult winter, calling on people to step up. David, I don't know if you can outdo Catherine copying you, but let's see.
What struck me about this, Rosie, is that 10 months into this, we're back to where it began, with the Prime Minister speaking to the country from his home, urging Canadians to stay at home. And it also reminds me of his last big national address on the night of the throne speech. We are in the moment they were trying to avoid when he gave that last big speech to the country.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Cases are not, I don't want to say out of control, I don't want to be too alarmist, but boy, they're not good. Yeah. And they're headed in a terrible direction based on the modeling that we've seen, even if current rates of contact are sustained. We heard from doctors like Isaac Bogosh last night saying that, 10,000, 20,000 cases, that's not something the health system can sustain for the short term, never mind the long haul. And you had a Prime Minister there who was more raw and more emotional than I think I've ever seen Justin Trudeau outside of speaking at a funeral or at a tragedy and a death. And in some ways, he's speaking to a tragedy in aggregate when you look at the daily death numbers and stuff that are reported by the health officials. And wanting to avoid blame because blame doesn't get buy-in is my sense of it. But, coming very close when saying to the people of Alberta and British Columbia, where the governments and the health systems haven't bought into the app, download it anyway. That's kind of going around the first ministers and the public health officers in those provinces to try to get people to buy in, because there are no restrictions between cross-border travel outside of the Atlantic bubble in this country. And so the virus is spreading across these different places. So his tone and his plea, because that's what it felt like today. It was a prime minister pleading with the country, and quite emotional when he talked about healthcare workers, right? And, you know, my mom was a nurse. I know the hours that she pulled in normal times and where things are right now, and the exhaustion that is setting in with the doctors and the nurses and the orderlies and the cleaners and everything in the healthcare system, and the risks they are putting themselves to. That is also not sustainable, because their families have to go out into society and isolate, and that can have a human resources toll on the healthcare system. So it was a moment there today for the Prime Minister, because much of what he said was ad-libbed outside of his prepared remarks, and really trying to be quite emotional and urgently speaking to the moment. So that's my analysis of what just happened. I have some news as well. The federal government has denied the Raptors' request to play in Canada until at least the All-Star break in the NBA season. A federal source confirms this. If the pandemic conditions continue to improve, the NBA, Canada's only NBA team, can maybe resume in Toronto. But as of right now, the federal government has decided that the Toronto Raptors have to find a temporary home. They're not. It's much like the decision with the Blue Jays. They're not going to allow the cross-border travel because of just where pandemic conditions are. So a federal source who's been working on that confirms that news for me. The Toronto Star has some reporting on this as well. So for basketball fans, you probably weren't going to be allowed to go to the game anyway. You're going to have to watch it on TV. The question is, where are the Raptors going to play?
Okay, I want to do just one quick go-around. I know that Jagmeet Singh is responding to some of the new modelling numbers, but I really do feel that the moment the Prime Minister was trying to convey, and even the sense that many of us feel, not only of fatigue, but also alluding to probably the people that all of us know who are not following the rules, and sort of make you wonder, oh, could I do that too? The Prime Minister saying, listen, don't. We all have to follow the rules, even when we're frustrated by others. And I just want to end with a thought from each of you on this other notion that I think is an important one, and that the government has talked about before, but was much more clearly articulated, I think, today. And that is the idea that you can only help everybody, the economy, by putting in place the strict public health measures. The Prime Minister saying today, before, in the first wave, which he admits was easier in many ways because it did allow for a national lockdown, we believe that it was a contradiction, that to put the public health measures in place would hurt the economy. He now, the government is trying to reframe that as though the best way to keep the economy going is to have these strict measures. And I just wanted both of your takes on that notion, and trying to, for lack of a better word, sell it that way, Catherine.
I think a lot of that rests on his shoulders, actually, Rosemary, that and I think we saw part of the effort today to convince Canadians that the supports are there. I mean, he talked about it in very general terms and said we're going to be there for everybody. One thing that I was thinking a lot about over the course of his announcement is that rent relief. He talked about the bill getting royal assent, that businesses can start to apply on Monday. I would say that is perhaps the biggest concern about all the programs that we've seen rolled out over the course of the pandemic. As the Prime Minister mentioned, this particular program, it's going to be retroactive to October. There are a lot of businesses that could not access it, a significant portion over the summer. The Canadian Federation of Independent Businesses would say that there are small businesses in this country that have not had access to that crucial rent relief. Essentially over the course of the whole pandemic now. So people need to know that their governments are there to support them, that the financial supports are there in order for them to not feel like this is a trade-off. This is an important move. The support that's now being announced, it is, I think, widely viewed as the right thing to do, but it is a critical piece, I think, of that balance that the government is trying to achieve.
David, your thoughts on that?
I look at what the Prime Minister said about in answering, I think it was Tom Perry's question, about people look at the vaccine and say, okay, I can buckle down, it's almost there, and oh, thank God it's coming, I don't have to worry anymore. That's going to be a real challenge for them too, right? Because the vaccine may almost be ready to go. It may come by the end of the first quarter, and vaccinations could start early. But if you listen to what Dr. New said earlier this week, we're talking the end of the year before the vast majority of the population will be vaccinated. That is a longer period of time from now to when people will be vaccinated from when this pandemic began. So a lot of misery and a lot of tragedy can happen between now and then if restrictions are eased too much, and if social distancing and medical practices erode too much, if our habits do not stay robust. so you want to have an economy to come back to. That requires workers, that requires customers. And I go back to the point I made before the Prime Minister spoke. Because the vaccine does provide that light at the end of the tunnel, there is now probably a finite period where we will have to live with this. That is becoming more and more apparent as the vaccine moves through the trial processes and then moves through the approval processes and moves through manufacturing and shipping. There is the ability of a country as rich as Canada to finance that. It's finding a way to do it. They're getting the rent program now largely right after getting it largely wrong with the first version of it. So the mechanisms now exist. I know Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, is looking at job sharing programs like what they have in Germany, where the government picks up a significant portion of salaries for people to work reduced work weeks as a way of sharing workload and taking financial strain off of companies. These are all things that have to be explored in earnest and with urgency to bridge to that endpoint of the end of next year that Public Health Agency of Canada points to as when we will have a level of vaccination that covers the bulk of the population, optimistically. So that needs to happen. I mean, the country has the money. It's not sustainable over a long period of time, but 12 months in the life cycle of a business, a country, and human is not an extraordinary period of time. So it can be done. And you look at the severe lockdowns going into force today. We hear in places like the GTA, Doug Ford is going to impose some of those. This lockdown rent subsidy and other programs can't come soon enough. The wage subsidy runs until June. We'll be in it until then, maybe even a little bit beyond.
Okay. Catherine Cullen, David Cochrane, thank you both for your analysis and your coverage today. Catherine hosting Power and Politics tonight for Vashi, so you can watch her there later at 5 Eastern. And David, you will be on the National later tonight with all of this too. Thank you both very much. And because the Prime Minister suggested he will be back at Rideau Cottage now, and he said working from home a little more, perhaps we will be back here on a more regular basis too. I'll leave you with this final thought too, as many of you are thinking about what the next number of weeks will bring to your families. The Prime Minister did say that he believes a normal Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate in December is quite frankly out of the question right now. But again, the Prime Minister, based on some of those new modeling numbers, pleading with Canadians to crack down, to step up, and to practice some of the behaviors that we saw from everyone back in the spring. On that note, I will leave you